Before Majin Buu, before Cell, before Freeza, and before the Saiyans, Goku was just a kid. He was always a fighter. The only thing that changed was his and his opponent's power level. Before traveling space trying to be the strongest in the universe, Goku was competing to be the strongest under the heavens in the World Martial Arts Tournament. Goku took down an entire army, beat the world's best assassin, saved the planet from certain destruction, met God, became a world champion, and got married. There's an entire story about Goku and how his life started before Raditz landed on Earth, and is it okay to skip all of it and start from this point? Should you or can you skip all of Dragon Ball and just start the story at Dragon Ball Z chapter or episode 1? I do analysis videos like this on Dragon Ball pretty often, so if you would consider leaving a like on the video or subscribing to the channel, I'd greatly appreciate it. Before getting started, I want to ask, why is this even a conversation? I think largely this is a conversation because of how Dragon Ball was serialized with its anime and the Western releases of the show. I don't plan to harp on this for too long, but there is a big difference in how Dragon Ball is marketed versus how it was originally released. There is no Dragon Ball Z in the original manga. There's only 42 volumes and 519 chapters of Dragon Ball. Had this been the case for the anime and Viz release of the manga as well, this conversation would likely never have been born, and granted, I do think Dragon Ball would have been less popular for it, but that's not the conversation we're having, at least not with this video. My point here is that no one tells you, hey bro, pick this manga up, just skip the first 194 chapters, or it tells you to watch an anime but go ahead and skip the first 150 episodes because it sounds ridiculous. The only community that even has something similar is One Piece fans telling you to just get past the first 500 chapters because Marineford is a good arc. Naruto is similar in this regard. No one tells you to skip Naruto part 1 to just watch Shippuden, even though in that case it's probably easier to do because of the series' constant use of flashbacks. Given that aspect of Naruto, it would be far easier for you to catch on to what happened in the past because they're going to show it to you constantly. This is something that the show gets criticized for, its overuse of flashbacks, but honestly, with the amount of filler the show has, it makes sense they'd want to remind viewers what was going on and how they got to this point. I'm rambling a bit, but Dragon Ball doesn't have that same luxury. While there are callbacks to the original series, there are not the constant reminders of what happened. The narrative structure of Dragon Ball doesn't call for it, and the best example of this is the beginning of the Android or Cell arc. While it's true Dr. Gero is connected to the Red Ribbon Army as told to us by the story, the connection here is the Red Ribbon Army name, not to any character that was there in the past, and the premise isn't something that you need to go back and read the Red Ribbon Army arc for. The original arc does include an android, being android number 8, but that isn't something that you need to know to enjoy or understand the current arc here. Dr. Gero is said to be an old scientist of the organization, but his presence in original Dragon Ball is absolutely zero. We don't even know the guy's name until Trunks comes back to the past to tell Goku. The androids aren't even the main focus of the Red Ribbon Army. It's not like something they seem to be super interested in, they just have one that they built and use. But to be fair, sometimes it's not always about that. It's not about the need for this arc to establish all that, although admittedly it would be cool if Gero and the interest in android creation were present in this arc, and this arc was a callback to that, or at least the beginning of it was. But the Red Ribbon Army keeping things under wraps, especially the name of their top scientist, isn't surprising, and the very fact that the android was built proves at least a little bit of interest in the creation of artificial humans, just like number 17 and 18. And similar to them, Android 8 defies the Red Ribbon Army as well, albeit in the opposite way, where 17 and 18 defy the army for their own admittedly selfish reasons and dislike for Dr. Gero. Number 8 disobeys their commands because he just doesn't like violence and is generally a gentle guy. I think the point I'm making is pretty clear. While you certainly don't need the Red Ribbon Army to understand the Android arc, it's a cool bit to know about going into that arc. So if answering the question if you can skip OG Dragon Ball, this arc to arc comparison does nothing for the idea that you have to read the original series. So what do you need OG Dragon Ball to understand? What are the things you won't know the weight of until you read the original series? This question is important because if these things are lacking in value, then the argument for having to watch the first part of this series will lose some of its stability. Let's start in the Saiyan saga. Obviously being the first Z arc, it's the most connected to original Dragon Ball. One of the biggest things you don't or won't really understand is how crazy it is when Raditz originally reveals that there is a whole alien race of people like Goku, and that Goku isn't some weird human with the ability to turn into a giant monkey. The reveal that Goku has an evil brother from this race is also a pretty big shock to anyone coming in reading this series, but probably the biggest shock for anyone is the fact that Goku teams up with Piccolo to go take Raditz down. Goku and Piccolo are enemies. This person is the reincarnation of the first major threat to the Dragon Ball world. Piccolo was bent on complete world domination, was responsible for the deaths of 3 of Goku's friends including Roshi and Krillin. And at this point in Dragon Ball, you can't get rebooted multiple times by the dragon. You get one revive and after that you're cooked. Goku is about forgiveness, however, and he did give Piccolo a senzu bean, so it's not super surprising from him, but this is extremely surprising to see out of Piccolo. Piccolo hates not only Goku, but he hates humanity in general and sees them as beneath him, lower beings if you will. And Goku beat him up terribly. The special beam cannon that took out Raditz and Goku was originally intended to only be used on Goku. The question from here is, does Dragon Ball Z or Kai do a good enough job going over Piccolo and Goku's feud or displaying enough for someone to understand that? The answer is no, but it also isn't really that important if you know all those details. The series does a good job establishing that Goku and Piccolo do not like each other and that this team up is unlikely. Piccolo makes it clear that he doesn't care what happens to Goku's son and that he isn't looking to pursue peace. He doesn't want Raditz to get in the way of his conquest for world domination, and that's why he's willing to team up with Goku to fight this one time. But afterwards it's back to the same feud, and Goku agrees with this, saying he'll stop him if he tries to conquer the world. So while we don't get all the nuanced details of their rivalry and why the team up is so important, you don't get the feeling Piccolo is a good guy either, and like I said earlier, you 100% get the knowledge that this team up is super unlikely. This is a large step forward in Piccolo's character development, but most of the development starts coming after this. And again, the same thing here is what I'm going to claim. While if you don't watch OG Dragon Ball, you cannot understand how crazy it is that Piccolo is choosing to train Goku's son to possibly be stronger than him and fight to defend Earth, you 100% get the meaning, and maybe not how crazy it is, but that it's something wild because Kami speaks it to the reader directly and what the reason for that change is. Piccolo also comments on this change after seeing Gohan's power. He says, "What exactly am I getting myself into to think I'm about to train the child that will become my greatest adversary?" But Kami's conversation with Mr. Popo definitely gives you a lot more information. I'm going to read the entire conversation here as it appears in the manga, but I went and watched the anime both dubbed and subbed here. They say the same things, at least for the Z Kai in the dub, but I want to read it all because it gets exactly what I'm saying. Mr. Popo asks Kami if there is something bothering him, and Kami says something changed about Piccolo, and while he can still feel the evil in his heart, it's somehow different than it used to be, and that he isn't acting like the villain you would expect him to. Mr. Popo adds that old Piccolo would never train Goku's son no matter what the circumstances were. Kami adds that he noticed there was something weird after Piccolo killed Raditz when his soul crossed over to Otherworld, which is weird since when killed by a demon clansman, you're supposed to be trapped in limbo, drifting between heaven and earth. The very fact that Raditz went to Otherworld is proof that he isn't the old Demon King, or that maybe Piccolo realized he as well will die in 1 year with Kami. Piccolo must want to pass on his knowledge to someone else, even if that someone is Goku's son. I think this entire conversation does a good job explaining why this change in Piccolo is so important, and the reason behind it being his own mortality and knowing his life will end soon and wanting to have something left on Earth. Keep in mind, Earth is ripe for the taking. Piccolo made his want for world domination clear. He could easily defeat everyone on Earth currently and rule Earth for a year before his death that he knows is coming. But he's choosing to leave something behind. He wants Earth to last with his student there to continue using his techniques even after he's gone. Of course, talking about Piccolo's development is important to anyone reading Dragon Ball Z or watching it, because later on in this arc, Piccolo sacrifices his life for Gohan, and that's clearly what this was all leading up to in the end. It's a complete in-the-moment save. Piccolo jumps in front of a blast meant for Gohan, but I think by this point, after being with these characters for this extended period of time, and Piccolo's last words to Gohan, that Piccolo's past isn't going to be important to how you feel about his death scene here. I think this is mostly all you can pull when it comes to original Dragon Ball being important to a viewing of Z. Of course, like I said, this part of the conversation is only being had because the anime and viz release of the manga split the series into 2 parts when it originally isn't 2 parts. But another thing that could be said here is that Z is simply cooler than original Dragon Ball. I can't speak to this from an objective standpoint, I guess, but when looking at what the series is most popular for, the things in Z are always going to be what take it. I mean, Z has Super Saiyan in it. It has the big beams and Ki Blast. It has Super Saiyan 3, but a large reason these are so popular over the other things in original Dragon Ball is because people won't go and give the series a chance. Keep in mind, even if you can skip original Dragon Ball, that doesn't mean you should ignore it. You should go back and read through the original series for the simple fact that it's more Dragon Ball content that's actually good and will give you a better understanding of the story. Not needing something to understand a story doesn't mean you can't have a better understanding with that thing in mind. So with that being said, I'd like to get to the final stretch of the video by making it clear I think you can skip OG Dragon Ball and still understand and enjoy Dragon Ball Z and onwards, but I don't think you should skip OG Dragon Ball. I strongly recommend this series because I personally enjoy it, and everyone else I know that has read or watched it enjoys it as well. To go along with my argument about how skipping the first 194 chapters of a manga or skipping the first 154 episodes of an anime would be looked at pretty poorly, and the only reason people say it is because the series got split, I'd like to recommend skipping a different number of chapters to get you into Dragon Ball. Skip to chapter 54. This is when Dragon Ball starts becoming just a little bit more serious with the introduction of the Red Ribbon Army, assassins like Tao Pai Pai, and then following this arc you have the second World Martial Arts Tournament that again is more serious, then leading into the Demon King Piccolo arc where you get the same Dragon Ball feeling until Z from there on out, at least in my opinion. That's of course if you're just getting into Dragon Ball and have never seen it before. I think if you've seen all of Z, you should watch or read OG Dragon Ball from the very beginning. You'd already have great appreciation for these characters you'll come to know even better through this series. The biggest reason I think you should read Dragon Ball, however, is Goku himself. Goku is 12 when we meet him, but he's a much different person than what we see in Z. He's been cut off from society his entire life, only ever knowing Grandpa Gohan. So watching Goku get adjusted to the world as well as develop into a better fighter and more complete person is personally my favorite journey in fiction. Goku is so confused by the simplest things in the beginning that he can't comprehend that Bulma doesn't have balls because she's a girl. Goku is 23 when we first see him in Dragon Ball Z after the 5-year time skip, but OG Dragon Ball covers the 6 to 7 years of his life fairly well, at least for what's on screen. And just mentioning what goes on when we don't see Goku during a time skip. I also think it's worth mentioning Dragon Ball Z being so good as a standalone part that you can watch it without having seen the previous series is, at least in my opinion, a good thing to say about the series. Because while some people would make the disingenuous argument that the first 190 chapters of a series not being needed somehow makes them irrelevant, but I think it just speaks to how well Dragon Ball actually explains its ongoing story. To be fair, I don't think you can drop into the middle of Freeza, Cell, or Buu sagas and just understand the story, but the argument doesn't lie there anyway, so I guess it's not super important to go over. The bottom line and the conclusion I was trying to reach with this video is that yes, you can indeed skip OG Dragon Ball. It's not going to be needed for you to understand and enjoy Z, and I think most people watching, you're probably watching for the sake of recommending it to friends who lived under a rock and haven't seen the series. You know your friends better than I do, but I think in most cases, if you're even considering what they should start with, They are probably the type of person that just needs to be started on Z. But like I said, don't let them ignore the original series just because they skipped it. Going back and watching Dragon Ball will probably be worthwhile for them when they have more appreciation for the characters instead of getting to know them through that show. If you liked the video, be sure to leave a like on it and consider subscribing to the channel as it really helps me out. But other than that, have a nice day.